You're listening to the Positive Distraction Podcast with Alexander McCall Smith.
The idea for the story came to me when I visited a friend with a sense of humour. Outside his house, in a remote part of Scotland, he had created a tiny helicopter landing pad, about 2 or 3 feet across. A drone might have landed there, but not a helicopter. Thinking about this later on, I asked myself, what would happen if somebody discovered a disused helicopter landing pad right next to their house? Helicopters welcome here. Jean chose the house at the far end of the glen because of, rather than in spite of, its isolation. She'd lived for most of her life in Glasgow, attending primary school there, then secondary school, finally going on to do a degree in music at the university. She was a good pianist, although not quite good enough to earn her living as an accompanist or concert performer. That did not trouble her, though. She was happy to be a music teacher and occasional composer. 1 or 2 of her compositions had been published by a firm of music publishers in London, and a more popular piece of hers, a song entitled Highland Tryst, had been featured on a disc entitled Scottish Music for Incurable Romantics. That title had tickled her. Why should romantics wish to cure themselves anyway? She was 38 when she decided that it was time to leave Glasgow. She'd become increasingly aware that most of her contemporaries seemed to have done something with their lives, had left Glasgow to work in London or abroad, or had married and were raising families. She was the only one, she felt, who had never done anything different. If she did nothing about that, then in 10 or 20 years, when she was still preparing students for their Royal College of Music piano examinations, she would realize that she was never going to do anything very much with her life. She did not want that, and so she announced to the parents of her students that she was intending to move and that there would be no more piano lessons, at least not from her. At the back of her mind was the thought that, although in Glasgow she'd not met anybody she might consider marrying, things might be different if she were to live in the country. There was, she'd been told, a much better chance of meeting a suitable man if you lived in a place where there were relatively few people. That was almost counterintuitive, but she believed it to be true. Moving into a remote house had an additional advantage. She hoped to be able to spend more time working on composition, and for that she needed silence. Glasgow, like other big cities, was simply too noisy. How could one hear music in one's head with incessant traffic noise drifting in from outside, or the sound of people in the street shouting out to one another? There was a bit of that where she lived, and it always disturbed her train of musical thought. The move might not be permanent, of course. Although she believed that she might be able to find a few music pupils in the nearby village, it was not clear whether that level of teaching would be enough to keep body and soul together. With the savings she'd accumulated, she would be able to spend at least 2 years in the country, living frugally and taking the occasional opportunity to earn pin money by playing the organ in local churches. She might also earn a little bit of money if the choral compositions she was writing were successful. It was feasible, just, and she decided to do it on the grounds that she wanted to have tried something different by the time of her 40th birthday, which was in 2 years' time. When she first went to see the house, she immediately fell in love with it. It had originally been a shepherd's house, but had been renovated when the farmer sold it. Thereafter, it had been used as a holiday cottage, left unlived in for long periods and gradually deteriorating in the way of unappreciated buildings. Had Jean not bought it, then it would probably have reached the point where the roof collapsed and the rain washed away the internal plaster. She was just in time to prevent that, and she then went on to prepare a scheme of wider repairs. Those were finished now, and the house was now waterproof, warm, and welcoming. But it was lonely. The quiet that she had sought was there, but it was accompanied by a pervasive sense of loneliness. She invited friends to come and visit her. At first they were happy enough to accept her invitations, but they had their own lives to lead, and those lives were in Glasgow. Visits became less common and eventually stopped altogether. Now she was largely alone at the head of the glen, relying for human contact on her trips into the village 8 miles away, where she could buy supplies and catch up on local news with the few residents she had managed to meet since she'd moved to the area. She spent more time composing. There was a suite of songs for soprano and tenor, and several choral pieces that had been commissioned by a prestigious choir. There was music for a ballet, a major coup on her part that could significantly boost her reputation, as the ballet was to be broadcast the following year. She was no longer just a piano teacher in Glasgow, devoting a few spare hours to composition. She was a composer who was being taken seriously in the competitive world of serious music. Jean worked on the creation of a garden around the house. She started with a vegetable patch, painstakingly setting up a line of raised beds in which she planted beans, potatoes, and salad vegetables. She established a herb bed in which rosemary, thyme, and chives were quickly established. She planted shrubs and a stand of saplings that would, she hoped, grow into a windbreak for the kitchen side of the house. She laid down a small patch of lawn, just large enough to take 2 deck chairs. She saw herself sitting on a deck chair with a visitor, looking down the glen towards the blue hills guarding the strath beyond. She saw herself clearly enough, but she could not see anybody in the other deck chair. That brought home to her the fact that whatever she did to this place, however much she tried to make it home, she had nobody with whom to share it. Not far from the house, just over a ragged line of low gorse bushes, was a field of rough grass, broken by clumps of reeds. This had been included in the sale of the house, but she had not thought about doing anything with it. It was rank grazing, ignored by the sheep who were still kept on the higher land nearby, and who sometimes wandered down to stare into her garden. It was here, on this patch of ground, that she found what seemed to be a flattened square area, now covered with grass, but showing a substratum of sand here and there. It was as if there had been a building there at some point, or a platform of some sort. A few miles away, there had been a small army base, used as a prisoner-of-war camp in the last war. Perhaps this was some sort of outlier of that. She took a spade to it to see what lay below the thin crust of soil and the exposed grass roots. The soil was shifted easily, and within a few minutes she had exposed a layer of hardened earth. This puzzled her, and she continued to expose it until she came across a straight line of white, something that looked like the ground markings of a sports pitch. She doubled her efforts, fetching a rake to make it possible to clear the surface of this white area more quickly. In less than an hour she'd exposed it completely, a large letter H, the white still perfectly visible against the brown of the sand around it. Now it was clear to her. She'd revealed an old helicopter landing pad. She stood back and smiled. She'd never imagined that she would be the proprietor of a helicopter landing pad, but now it seemed that she was, and it was in good condition, although here and there the white of the large H looked in need of touching up. She would do that, she thought, because if you have a helicopter landing pad, it's somehow incumbent upon you to keep it in good condition. A helicopter landing pad, after all, is a sign of distinction. Helicopters did not land just anywhere. There had to be a reason for them to descend onto those inviting H's. She smiled as she sent a message to a friend in Glasgow. "You will never guess what I've discovered in my garden," she said. "A helicopter landing pad." "Fancy that," wrote back her friend. "What a strange thing to find. What are you going to do with it?" She thought about that. She would keep it, she decided. There was no reason to obliterate a remnant of local history. There must have been a reason for helicopters to use it in the past, and that reason was part of the wider story of the area, and perhaps of the house itself. 2 weeks later, When Jean was sitting in the room she used as a studio, she heard the sound of an approaching aircraft. Going to the window, she looked out and saw, following the contours of the nearby hill, a small helicopter. The afternoon sun caught the glass of its bulbous front, sending out a sharp point of light, and at that precise moment the helicopter veered off its course and started heading directly towards the house. By the time Jean was outside, the helicopter was hovering directly overhead, several hundred feet above the landing pad. It swung slightly to one side, and then started to drop down, adjusting its position from time to time to compensate for the effect of the slight breeze that had risen. Within a couple of minutes it had landed, settling on top of the large white H, causing small dust storms of sand to eddy briefly before the engine was cut and the rotors moved gently to a stop. The pilot pushed the door back and stepped down onto the pad. He looked in Jean's direction and waved. Silence had returned, and she heard him call out as he began to walk across to where she was standing at the edge of her lawn. "Hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. She shook her head. She assumed that he was perfectly within his rights, landing on her helipad. After all, that was what helipads were for. Perhaps there was some sort of ancient right of way operating here, whereby helicopters were entitled to descend on an available H, irrespective of ownership. "Would you like a cup of tea?" she asked. "Or coffee, perhaps? Both are equally easy." He gave her a warm smile. "Tea would be perfect," he said, adding, "if you're making it, I wouldn't want to put you to any trouble." He stepped forward to introduce himself. "I'm Mike, by the way." She told him her name. "It's good of you to have a helipad," he said. "Not many people have them these days." "I only recently uncovered it," she said. "I'm glad that it's turning out to be useful." She shot a glance in his direction. He was about her age and had firm, regular features. He was exactly how you would imagine a helicopter pilot to be. They sat out on the lawn. Jean was grateful that she'd recently bought a second deck chair. This was exactly the sort of situation in which extra seating would be useful. He told her that he was on his way to Dundee. He lived near Fort William, and he was heading to Dundee to pick up a part for a small hydroelectric station that he'd installed on his farm. "I generate about 14 kilowatts, he said. "It's a micro system, but it gives me all the power I need for my mushroom-growing barns." He paused. "I'm a mushroom farmer, you see." "Amazing," she said. She'd never met a mushroom farmer before, let alone one who piloted his own helicopter. "I'm quite a large producer, in fact," he said. "We employ 5 people. We sell our mushrooms all over the country, chanterelles, oysters, other exotics. Our mushrooms get into all the big supermarkets." "That must be very gratifying," said Jean. "It would be very disheartening if you were to grow mushrooms and nobody were to buy them." He laughed. "You can say that again." She wanted to ask him why he had landed, but she was worried that it would seem a bit unfriendly, and she wanted to befriend this man. She really wanted that. He said, "I'd better not linger too long. I have to get to Dundee." "Of course." He went on to say that he would be staying in Dundee overnight with an old school friend who was a surgeon at a local hospital there. "He's my oldest friend," he said. "We were boys in short trousers together a long time ago." "Such friends are so important," Jean said, a note of wistfulness creeping into her voice. He looked up at the sky. There were small banks of cumulus cloud here and there, little islands of white in an ocean of light blue. He said, "Would you mind if I called in on the way back tomorrow?" She tried not to sound too eager, but she was. "That would be fine. That's what a helicopter pad is for." He laughed. "Oh my," he said. The following afternoon, she heard the helicopter returning. She went outside and was standing there as it came into view. She stood there as it descended, the wind from its whirling rotors sending her hair in wisps about her face. He stepped out. He was carrying a bunch of flowers, roses, red and white. He took his pilot's sunglasses off and smiled.
thank you for joining Sir Alexander McCall Smith on his Positive Distraction podcast. You can find Alexander's books and details of all his forthcoming events on his website, www.alexandermccallsmith.com. All are available to purchase in your local independent high street bookshop, on Amazon, or on bookshop.org. Alexander is the much-loved author of global bestseller The #1 Ladies Detective Agency, the long-running 44 Scotland Street serial novel, the Isabel Dalhousie novels, the new Perfect Passion Company series, and many standalone novels and short story collections. In addition, he is known throughout the world for his reassuring, restorative poetry collections. In moments of darkness in the world, readers turn to his work to lift them from the gloom.